President Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act today. Now, a federal judge is considering a wide-reaching order to block him from deporting non-citizens under that act.
Turning to immigration now, CBS News reports that President Trump is planning to use a law from 1798. He talked about this on the campaign trail to help carry out deportations to Guantanamo Bay. That part he didn't necessarily reference.
From Venezuela to Guantanamo Bay to hold them there and then deport them under the Alien Enemies Act, which of course is a law that was really just passed by Congress and signed into law.
Donald Trump just made a decision that's turning the immigration debate on its head. His latest move has sparked outrage, legal battles, and a fierce national debate over how far the government can go in the name of security. And what did he do this time around? Well, Trump has invoked a rarely used wartime authority to speed up deportations, targeting individuals the U.S. claims have ties to dangerous criminal organizations. Supporters see it as a tough but necessary step to protect the country, while critics argue it's an abuse of power that could have far-reaching consequences. The backlash was immediate. Civil rights groups and immigration advocates are already fighting the decision in court, and a federal judge has stepped in to put the plan on hold, for now. But Trump isn't backing down. His administration insists this is just the beginning, and they're prepared to push forward. With the legal fight heating up and the political stakes higher than ever, the big question remains. Will this policy hold up, or is it about to unravel? Let's take a closer look. A federal judge has just thrown a wrench into the Trump administration's latest crackdown on immigration, temporarily blocking its attempt to use an old wartime law to fast-track deportations. The decision came just in time, forcing planes already in the air, carrying deported migrants to turn back to the U.S. Last week, Trump's team invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a law designed for times of war or foreign invasions to justify mass deportations. The administration claimed that members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua had unlawfully infiltrated the country and were waging a form of irregular warfare. Trump's proclamation ordered their immediate arrest, detention, and removal. But U.S. District Judge James Boasberg wasn't having it. After initially blocking the deportation of 5 individuals, he quickly expanded the ruling to cover all non-citizens in U.S. custody affected by the proclamation. He stressed the urgency of the situation, pointing out that deportation flights were already taking off, and ordered any aircraft carrying those migrants to return to U.S. soil immediately. The harm here is obvious. These people would be deported before they even get their day in court, Boasberg ruled, adding that delaying their removal wouldn't put any real burden on the government. His restraining order will hold for at least 14 days while legal battles continue, with another hearing scheduled later this month. The Justice Department has already appealed, taking the fight to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Meanwhile, the administration remains firm on its stance, justifying the move by designating Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization. The White House insists that their presence in the U.S. poses a serious security threat. The Alien Enemies Act has rarely been used in U.S. history, only appearing during World Wars I and II, when it led to the detention and expulsion of German, Austro-Hungarian, Italian, and Japanese immigrants. It also played a role in the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, a dark chapter in U.S. history that critics argue shouldn't be repeated. Civil rights groups, including the ACLU and Democracy Forward, rushed to intervene, filing an emergency request before the order could take effect. The ACLU argued that criminal activity, no matter how severe, doesn't meet the legal definition of an invasion, which is required for the Alien Enemies Act to apply. But what does the Alien Enemies Act really mean? The Alien Enemies Act grants sweeping wartime powers, allowing the government to deport non-citizens without the chance to argue their case in court. Trump had repeatedly hinted during his campaign that he would invoke extraordinary measures to crack down on illegal immigration. And he wasted no time laying the groundwork with a series of executive orders on his first day back in office. The origins of the act date back to 1798, when the U.S., anticipating war with France, passed a series of laws expanding federal authority. Concerned that foreign-born residents might sympathize with the enemy, Congress created the Alien Enemies Act to give the president broad powers to detain and deport non-citizens during wartime. Since then, it has only been used 3 times, in the War of 1812, World War I and World War II. During World War II, fear of foreign influence led to mass internment across the U.S. The law played a role in justifying the incarceration of over 120,000 people of Japanese descent, including U.S. citizens, as well as German and Italian immigrants. After Judge James Boasberg blocked Trump's mass deportation plan, the administration quickly pivoted to another strategy, outsourcing detention. Almost simultaneously, the White House struck a deal to pay El Salvador $6 million to imprison 300 alleged members of the Tren de Aragua gang for a year. The arrangement followed discussions between Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, focusing on using El Salvador's notorious prison system to house deported migrants. Bukele's government has already detained over 84,000 people since 2022 in its aggressive crackdown on gang violence, often without due process. Meanwhile, ACLU attorney Lee Gallant raised alarms that 2 deportation flights had already taken off before Boasberg's ruling, one to El Salvador and another possibly to Honduras. Boasberg made it clear any planes carrying individuals deported under Trump's order would have to turn around mid-flight and return to U.S. soil. But is the U.S. really at war? What's the point of this act? For years, Trump and his allies have insisted that the U.S. is under invasion by undocumented immigrants. During President Joe Biden's term, arrests at the U.S.-Mexico border exceeded 2 million annually for 2 consecutive years, an unprecedented figure. Many of those detained were later released into the U.S. to seek asylum. The situation peaked in December 2023, when border apprehensions hit a record-breaking 250,000 in a single month. However, by February, those numbers had plunged to fewer than 8,400, the lowest monthly figure since the 1960s. Trump wasted no time making immigration enforcement a top priority. In his inaugural address, he declared that the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 would be a critical weapon in his crackdown. He vowed to unleash the full power of federal and state law enforcement to root out foreign gangs and criminal networks that, according to him, were bringing dangerous crime into the U.S. As commander-in-chief, he argued that his highest duty was to protect the nation from threats and invasions. Critics, however, argue that Trump is stretching the law far beyond its original intent. The Alien Enemies Act was designed to target foreign governments in times of war, not loosely organized criminal groups. The Brennan Center for Justice called Trump's use of the law a massive overreach, warning that applying it during peacetime to override standard immigration laws would be an abuse of power. The center also argued that mass detentions and deportations under the act conflicted with modern principles of due process and equal protection. Despite the legal challenges, Trump has remained steadfast in his stance. In his wartime declaration, he accused Tren de Aragua of carrying out, attempting, and threatening an invasion against the United States, operating as an irregular warfare unit under the direction of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. The gang, which originated in the chaotic prison system of Venezuela's Aragua state, expanded its influence as millions of Venezuelans fled the country's economic collapse over the past decade. Last month, the Trump administration officially classified Tren de Aragua, along with 7 other Latin American criminal organizations, as a foreign terrorist organization. The move was meant to increase pressure on drug cartels operating in the U.S. and penalize anyone aiding them. Meanwhile, a report from Congress's Research Division suggested that Trump's team may attempt to use the terrorist designation to argue that the gang's activities constitute a limited invasion, an unprecedented legal argument that has yet to be tested in court. The U.S. has struggled to deport Venezuelan nationals in large numbers, as the Venezuelan government has historically refused to take them back. There have been a few exceptions in recent weeks. Around 350 people have been deported, including 180 who were detained at the U.S. naval base in Guantanamo Bay for over 2 weeks before being sent back to Venezuela. Operation Safeguard was initially set to launch on January 21, 2025, but plans were derailed after details of the operation were leaked. The mission, led by Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE), aimed to rapidly locate, detain, and deport undocumented migrants living in U.S. cities. Despite the delay, the operation remained a top priority, with ICE agents preparing behind the scenes for what was expected to be one of the most aggressive immigration enforcement actions in recent history. Planning for the operation took place in Chicago between late 2024 and early 2025. ICE field agents working under the Trump transition team coordinated efforts outside the oversight of the agency's leadership and the outgoing Biden administration. Just days before Trump's second inauguration, an operational briefing was held in Chicago on January 17th, laying out the framework for mass raids targeting urban areas. According to reports, the plan involved roughly 150 ICE agents conducting simultaneous raids across Chicago before expanding to other major cities. The operation was expected to grow further, with additional federal law enforcement officers reassigned, and even the possibility of National Guard troops being deputized to assist. In an interview with NBC News on January 18th, then President-elect Donald Trump confirmed that the administration was ready to act, though he stopped short of naming the operation directly.
I'm going to look at everything. We're going to look at individual cases, yeah.
Okay.
But I'm going to be acting very quickly.
Former IC Director Tom Homan later revealed that deportation flights were scheduled within days of the operation's launch.
Not only helping us with departure flights on military planes.
However, a major leak in targeting information forced officials to reconsider the timeline, and the highly publicized Chicago raids never materialized. According to the Wall Street Journal, the city had been singled out due to Trump's ongoing feud with its Democratic mayor, Brandon Johnson, as well as its sanctuary city policies. While the large-scale raids didn't happen as initially planned, ICE still carried out widespread immigration arrests across several cities. On January 23rd, federal agents detained 538 migrants in Boston, Denver, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Seattle, Miami, and Washington, D.C. Officials later told ABC News that these actions were routine and not part of a larger surge. The following day, the White House revealed that deportations to Guatemala were actively underway, utilizing military aircraft rather than commercial flights. A shift that raised eyebrows, though officials framed it as a logistical adjustment rather than an expansion of ICE's operations. The leaked details of Operation Safeguard sparked backlash from immigration activists and political leaders. U.S. Representatives Jesus Garcia and Delia Ramirez were among those who condemned the planned raids, warning that they would fuel fear and disrupt communities. But Trump didn't stop at that. The clash over deportations didn't just stay within U.S. borders. It turned into a full-blown diplomatic fight between Trump and Colombian President Gustavo Petro. It all started in January this year, when Petro refused to allow 2 deportation flights to land in Colombia, defying Washington's orders and setting off a firestorm. Trump, never one to let a challenge go unanswered, responded with immediate retaliation. The U.S. Embassy in Bogotá shut down visa services, effectively blocking many Colombians from traveling to the U.S. On top of that, the administration slapped a travel ban on Colombian officials it deemed responsible for interfering with the deportation process. But Trump wasn't done yet. He made it clear that if Colombia wanted to stand in his way, there would be economic consequences. He announced a 25% tariff on Colombian goods, hitting the country where it hurts: trade. And just to drive the message home, he warned that if Petro didn't change course within a week, that tariff would jump to 50%. With tensions rising, the dispute over deportations had now spiraled into a heated standoff over trade and international relations. Petro held his ground, Trump escalated, and the world watched to see who would blink first. After all the threats and diplomatic sparring, the U.S. and Colombia finally struck a deal by the end of January, allowing deportations to resume, but on Bogotá's terms. Colombian Foreign Minister Luis Gilberto Murillo announced that his country would once again accept deportees, but only under dignified conditions. To ensure that, Colombia even offered to use its own presidential plane to fly migrants back. And let's not forget when Trump's administration also deported Indians. On February 5th, 2025, a U.S. military plane carrying 104 Indian nationals touched down in Amritsar, Punjab, marking the longest deportation flight ever conducted on a military aircraft. But the real controversy wasn't about the distance. It was about the treatment of those on board. the deportees were shackled, with handcuffs on their wrists and chains around their legs, sparking outrage back in India. Criticism came swiftly, particularly from opposition leaders who slammed the BJP-led government for failing to stand up to Washington. MP Shashi Tharoor called the U.S. handling of the deportation unacceptable, while opposition leader Rahul Gandhi urged Prime Minister Narendra Modi to take action, insisting that Indians deserve dignity and humanity, not to be bound in restraints. Some deportees later described the flight as nothing short of torture. What made this situation even more contentious was the fact that over 1,000 Indian nationals had been deported on commercial flights the previous year, without any major public backlash. This time, however, the optics of military transport and reports of harsh treatment fueled political firestorms. Just 10 days later, reports emerged that another deportation flight, carrying 119 Indians, was set to land in Amritsar that evening. Punjab Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann accused the central government of deliberately choosing Amritsar as the landing site, arguing that it was tarnishing Punjab's reputation. The flight landed at 11:40 p.m., and for some deportees, their families were there to greet them. But once again, controversy followed. Male deportees were handcuffed upon arrival, and Sikh deportees in particular were singled out, forced to remove their turbans. The Shiromani Gurudwara Parbandhak Committee condemned the act, calling it a blatant disregard for Sikh religious customs.